Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I'm Courtney Anderson, and this is episode 216, episode 216 of this show. And I am very excited today because we have the debut of a new series. Our series today is Meeting Mayhem. Our Meeting Mayhem series. This is the debut episode. And so, of course, what we're talking about, meetings in our lives for our work, whether it's our professional work or our volunteer work, we are often in meetings. Meetings are marvelous. We know that. We love meetings. Meetings are great. The challenge is that sometimes we can have a rare instance where a meeting that is necessary and, of course, fun could end up in being an example of mayhem. And that will result when we just don't use all of our best practices, or we're unaware sometimes of the consequences of some of our structural issues regarding our meetings. Mayhem, of course, we're talking about disorder, chaos. So we don't want disorder and chaos. We don't want anything that damages our organization and our goals. No, we're using meetings because they're going to elevate our organization. They're going to do everything to help us more efficiently, more effectively meet and surpass our goals. So meetings are marvelous. Mayhem, not so much. How does it happen that you have a meeting that itself creates mayhem? That's what our series is about. So I'm actually excited, and it was something I debated and thought through for a while, thinking, do we need another series for this? But there are so many questions, concerns, and issues that community members like yourself have shared with me regarding just the issue of meetings. And meetings are such a mainstay of our day-to-day lives and activities that it does require and necessitate another really focused series just on meeting mayhem. So this is going to be a delight. I'm thrilled and excited for the series to debut. This is episode, of course, 216 of our show, Solutions with Courtney Anderson. This is our audio version of our show, and we have our companion video version. So we call this our audio version, or our talk show or radio talk show podcast. And then we have our video version, which is our television talk show podcast. So come to CourtneyAnderson.com and check out this show site. We've got an individual micro show site as part of our main site at CourtneyAnderson.com. And while you're on the site, look around. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of content. We are constantly adding new material. This program, blog entries, articles, upcoming webinars and seminars. It is a thrill and a delight for me to continue to be able to provide this program to you, my community member, community around the world. And hopefully this new series will just be part of that ongoing relationship that we have together, where we provide a wealth of resources and work together to ensure that you are surpassing your goals and practicing the joyful art of business. And that, of course, is when you do everything that you can to make sure you stop and ask yourself, how do I feel? How do I feel? How do I feel about my work? Do I feel good? Do I feel miserable? Do I feel frightened or scared? What's going on? And we're going to broadly aim for, more often than not, feeling positive. We just call that joyful. When we feel prolonged instances of unhappiness and boredom and frustration, that's a warning sign for us to go ahead and make some changes. Specifically to this series, we have a relatively narrow focus: meetings. Our first show in this series today is the topic of this program. The topic of the program today is virtual meetings and mute. Virtual meetings and mute. We're going to be talking about virtual meetings, but specifically virtual meetings and the mute button. That's what we're talking about. And this is a show, again, that has come up because of things my community members share with me. People talk to me when I'm giving presentations and speeches. Sometimes individuals that I'm working with doing coaching, individual career strategy sessions will bring up these types of things. And then I myself am involved in meetings often. And one of the things that I deal with is the distributed meeting or the virtual meeting, where some people are maybe in person, some people are on the phone, some people are maybe on the internet. Very, very common in my day-to-day practices. So let's dive in and see what we can do in this episode talking about Meeting Mayhem series, and specifically virtual meetings and mute. So when we talk about, again, meetings, my argument is that meetings are awesome. And that's because we are all about sharing knowledge and coming up with ways to maximize our outcome, the optimal outcome. So it could be in terms of finance, it could be in terms of service to the public, it could be in terms of efficiency or speed, it could be in terms of quantity or quality. It doesn't specifically matter, because everything that we do is within this framework. It's within this framework of ensuring that we are pursuing excellence. And the meetings, again, allow us to share knowledge with other partners. So it could be a peer, it could be a supervisor or subordinate, it could be a client. I certainly have a lot of client meetings. It could be someone in a group. Maybe it's my volunteer group. Maybe it's a social group. Maybe it's a group of people who have the mastermind group, where people get together who they're not peers and they're not working on a volunteer project, but they may have similar professional interests, and so they share knowledge. So meetings are marvelous. The, again, underlying challenge is, what are the steps that we need to take when we prepare for our meetings to ensure that we optimize our outcome, that it's going to be as effective as possible. And one of the seemingly simple issues that I have experienced in meetings around the world, what do we do when technology allows us to have better meetings? And virtual meetings are an outgrowth of the technology allowing us to be able to bring in more experts and have the opportunity to share knowledge without being restricted geographically. So without having to wait and say, okay, well, when are we all going to be in Ohio? When are we all going to be in Belize? When are we all going to be together in Johannesburg? We don't have to wait. We can clear our schedules, and maybe one person's in Johannesburg, one person's in Belize, somebody else is in Cleveland. We can have our meeting tomorrow. That's awesome. I am a fan and an enthusiastic one of the technology that allows us to serve other people and have clients, peers, people that we can learn from, and not be restricted to these geographic obstacles where we all have to physically be in the same space at the same time. So this is a great thing. Virtual meetings are an asset. The challenge is that the technologies move so quickly that we may not have changed our practices or our preparation process, where we've adjusted to the opportunities that are available. So for example, when I graduated from college, from university with my bachelor's degree, my undergraduate degree, my equivalent of a typically standard 4-year in the States degree, your first undergraduate degree, or your full undergraduate degree, because your first might be the partial undergraduate degree in the States, an associate degree, and then a bachelor's degree. Okay, so I finished and graduated, and I earned that, yay, and I did that. I was 20 years old, which was awesome in some ways and awful in other ways. And I was working all through school to get money to eat and pay my rent and all those kind of good things, in addition to my scholarships that I'd earned academically. And virtual meetings didn't really happen much. There were conference calls that would happen, but even that, you would need to have a little bit more sophisticated phone system so that it could handle more than one call on the line. And between the time that I've graduated from undergrad and now, the time of recording this program, which has just been a little while. I know you're thinking, well, Courtney, you're barely a day over 20 right now. Well, yeah, it's all relative. The technology has changed so much that people have portable phones. I remember the first cell phone that I ever touched in my real life, in my real hands. I'll never forget it. Wow. And that was after, way after this time. So fast forward to now, not only do people have portable phones, but they have the smartphone, which is basically something that I could honestly, in science fiction, wouldn't have imagined as a child, where you have a computer with you. And now we've gone beyond that, where you may have your wearable device, where your Google Glass, or another brand I'm sure will come out and move into these spaces, and a watch that may also have a lot of the same computer technology. So we've moved so quickly that now what used to be a big deal, literally, I remember when I opened one of my businesses in my early 20s, you had to specifically request and get the wiring to be able to have multi-line phone systems. You had to get the hardware that would be able to handle it. Again, you have to have the office set up to be able to handle it. It was a big thing. It was a huge, big thing. Now, forget that. Most people, little children, walk around with this incredibly powerful device that will allow them to take a call, place the call on hold, have a multiple line call, have conference calls, have video calls. I mean, this is amazing, right? I am so super excited to see what else happens before I leave this body as I know it, in this life as I know it, because it's so exciting, right? The virtual meetings, again, allow us to tap into expertise, into new client markets, to have support for our staff, ourselves, to have a mentoring, education, a knowledge sharing. This is a win-win. And the technology now, like I said, it used to be a huge hassle. You needed the infrastructure, you needed the hardware, all this kind of stuff. Forget about it. Now, boom. Many people literally carry around with them all the hardware they need. It's amazing. So this is a good thing. As I said, what tends to happen is these things have happened so quickly that our processes for how we run meetings may not have kept up or been ahead of the changes. So when you have a traditional physical meeting, and by the time I'd opened my law firm in my later 20s, that's what I did, daily. The majority of my time was in meetings or in court. So people would come, they get in their vehicle or on the bicycle, or if they lived close enough, they'd walk, and they'd come down to my office. And of course, I would commute to my office, and I'm, dressed in my nice work outfit, and they're dressed to meet with me, and then we're sitting in the same room and we're talking. And that was great. And those are still fantastic modalities for meetings. There was not necessarily a concern or issue in a traditional synchronous meeting, in a physical space shared meeting, about needing to mute someone. The idea of muting them or making the noise quieter, right? Because we're just humans sitting in the same space. Now, there may be someone who speaks loudly. That's okay. We're in the same room. And we also have all of these other cues. I have eye contact, we have posture, we have our breathing, we have a lot of other cues that we use when we communicate with other humans in synchronous physical space, where I can then read, sort of where they're going to go, when they're going to take a space, are they thinking, what's going on. And when we move to the virtual meetings, which again are fantastic, it allows us to, again, have somebody in Belize, somebody in South Africa, somebody in the US. Awesome. What we need to remember, though, is just because we have this almost ubiquitous access to the software and the hardware to allow us, right, to make these calls. It used to be a huge big deal to make a long distance phone call. I mean, a big deal. And even a little bit before my personal life experience, it was a huge deal. They would literally hire human operators to be able to relay the logistics necessary to place a long distance call. And then it became where they would have it automated, but it was still a big deal. Now, like I said, it's amazing. I'm on the internet, and with things like Skype and that type of technology, long distance it's basically the same as somebody, calling somebody a couple of yards away. So I didn't used to think about in my meeting planning and my meeting preparation and process this idea of I need to use technology to mute people. When I had the opportunity to open up very quickly, would allow people from anywhere in the world to be on a call, a voice meeting at least, and or a video, I didn't necessarily think I need to focus on muting someone. What's tended to happen as we've moved forward, we want to open up access because, as we said earlier, what's the purpose of the meeting? The purpose is to share knowledge, right? And so we want to have as many people as possible that will be able to benefit this optimum outcome and sharing knowledge. So maybe I have 10 people on the call. Maybe I have 100 people. Maybe I have 1,000 people. As I've shared with you, in addition to all of our programs that we have and resources, we are rolling out upcoming webinars and seminars where we're going to be doing some of this. Some of them in synchronous, some of them asynchronous. And part of what we're looking at and the reality of this, and I certainly am aware of, is that when you have a meeting and you have more than one person, and I know you're thinking, well, duh, one person isn't a meeting. I would argue it kind of is, right? It's a session. You're thinking. You have a meeting with yourself. Part of your challenge is as you move forward and you're trying to consider what your other options are, you think to yourself, hey, I'm going to bring in other people to share knowledge. When you have the virtual meeting and people do not use the mute option appropriately, it derails the meeting, and it does and often creates disorder and chaos, which is a mayhem. And that's why it's in our meeting mayhem session. So have you ever been in this situation? Time for the meeting. Okay, so I don't care if it's 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, right? We're on the call. So the person who starts the meeting starts the call. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here. This is going to be a fantastic meeting. We're going to share our upcoming third quarter revenue goals for our real estate firm. All right. So I'm on this call. I'm psyched. I'm excited because I want to share that knowledge. I want to know about the goals. I'm related to the outcome. It benefits me individually and collectively for my group, whether it's my work group or my family and friend group. Like, I am interested in this call, right? That's why I'm at the meeting. So the person did that intro, and then they say, okay. And so the first item that we have on the agenda here is we're going to do an overview of the data that we from last quarter. And then you hear, hey, put that down. Woof. What is all of that? Those are noises from other people on the call that have nothing to do with the call. So I have heard and been on these types of calls where I've heard people talking to either family members, maybe children, pets. I've heard pets themselves make noise. I've heard birds. I've heard dogs, cats. I'm sure I've heard other things I probably didn't recognize what the noises were. I've heard people who are in a travel transit situation. Maybe they're on the metro, maybe on the train, maybe they're in a car, and I hear traffic going by or noise. I hear sirens. I mean, you hear everything. I've heard TVs in the background or internet video. I've heard music. I've heard stuff I'm sure I don't even know what I was hearing. I think on occasion I've heard people interacting with whether at a store, like buying something at a store, drive-through restaurant. None of that I should have heard. Now, why did this happen? And okay, first let's look at this though. What is the outcome when you're in there and you're ready to hear this data about the real estate call? This is important to you. The information is important. You need to share knowledge. That's why you're on the call. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there, right? And now you're having to hear all of this. A couple of things happen. What I frequently have experienced is someone who does have the agenda will start to say things like, excuse me, can we please mute? Can you mute yourself? I need you guys to put yourself on mute. I'm hearing some background noise. Oh, I forgot about some other things. Typing. So which makes sense. A lot of people obviously are in the same office, or even maybe they're in their home office or a remote office, so they're typing, which makes sense. You're having a meeting about something related to work, so it makes sense that you might be on your computer and doing work. So typing, right? Other calls. All right. Okay. So the person leading the meeting will start to say things like, excuse me, we're hearing background noise. We're getting some interference. Can we please have everyone put themselves on mute? Okay. This brings up the reality that the meeting is already chaotic. We've already lost control. We were there. We were focused on our task at hand. I gave this hypothetical example of real estate data, and all of a sudden now we're mentally derailed. We're not thinking about the data. What are we thinking about? What's that noise? Where are they? Is that a baby crying? Is that a ferret in the background? What's that noise? What's going on? I don't know. Did they just order a Happy Meal at the restaurant to eat? And now I'm not thinking about the data. Now I may start thinking about all kind of things like, who is that? Why did they do that? Or I'm hungry. Or I wonder how my ferret's doing. Or that reminds me, that I want to go out to eat, or whatever. Whatever it is, I'm now off track and off focus. And the most precious element of our lives, of course, is time. Because to the best of my knowledge, as of right now, I don't have a way to replenish it. If I've spent today, this moment, it's spent. I don't know how. I mean, if there is a way that exists, I don't know it. And there may not be a way that exists right now that we're aware of to go back and fix it. So if I spent my Tuesday at 2 p.m. listening to somebody doing something that's not related to my meeting, it's gone. Like Tuesday at 2 p.m., that date on that calendar, it's finished. It's over. I can't get it back. It's gone. And so what are the emotions that people feel when this happens? Well, like I said, people are, the thought process, they're distracted. Maybe it triggers for them that they're hungry or sleepy or whatever, or they wonder how their pet or their baby or what's going to be in traffic later for them. But the other thing that people start to get is really frustrated. And the frustration and sometimes even anger comes from the fact that you can't get the time back. And this is important. The whole reason that you call the meeting is for something important. That's a shared agreement. And people want to get that information. Like, I'm hanging on bated breath, right? And yet here it is. And it's just as intrusive and awful as if you were, you went to a music concert and you're excited and it's your favorite song. And then the people stop playing the music and start saying things totally unrelated to the music. Hey, is someone over there, eating, is that ice cream? And you think, well, what's this about? I'm listening to the music. I want to hear my song. What if you went to the theater and it was a play and they stopped the play and then and started talking about other things? Isn't it a little warm in here? I feel like it's a little hot. Can we do something? Really? Like, I'm anticipating this. I'm looking forward to this. I'm experiencing it. And so when you stop it, when you stop the live event, and a virtual meeting's a live event, I'm experiencing it. It's live. It's not recorded. If it was a recorded meeting, I would just fast forward, right? Because then I would just fast forward past the part that's wasting my time. But it's not. I'd still be upset, though, that it ruined the flow of what I needed, the data or the information or my favorite song or whatever. We have to think about it like that. I think part of the problem that leads to the meeting mayhem situations is we diminish the power and the importance of the meeting. Meetings are important. I've had moments in my life where my entire life pivoted based on information in that meeting, or events in that meeting, things that happened in that meeting. They are important. And they're a good thing when used appropriately. And we should plan for them and understand that they are much more special than I think we may sometimes treat them in our day-to-day experiences. And again, our day-to-day experiences may be based on, to some extent, this concept of, hey, it's a routine meeting. I'm in meetings all the time. Meetings aren't special. Meetings are all I do. And there's interesting data and research, right, on how many, the percentage of time people allocate to meetings, which of course varies widely based on what type of industry you're in, what type of work you do, what type of situation that you're in. But we all have some experience with meetings. What I'm arguing is that even if you're frequently in a meeting, you shouldn't become so habituated to it that you forget what the real purpose is and that they should be treated as something special. Just because something special happens frequently doesn't mean it's still not special, right? The love of a grandchild, the special, hug of a grandchild is still special, even though it may happen frequently. And we need to remember that. And that's all I'm saying. So when we're having the meeting and we got derailed, by then we've already lost what the optimal situation and we've already descended into mayhem. Now, what may we do to prevent this from happening? Well, the obvious is that you want to have a protocol set up where no one is able to interrupt the actual live event, and that's not on the agenda. So having the software and or hardware so that you can, whoever's running the meeting, in charge of the meeting, has allocated who's going to be speaking, and then when you will open up the opportunity for questions. And from the beginning, before the meeting even starts, set it up where no one has the ability to speak or be heard who's not on that agenda item at that time. Problem solved. Now, part of this is because people who may be tasked with the meeting don't have control over the technology that's being used. And so they may say, hey, ideally, that's what I would have done. But I was told, hey, you got to run this meeting. It's on the real estate data from the last quarter, but you're not going to have any control over the technology, and the technology I'm giving you doesn't allow you to do a mass mute. Okay, now that is an issue that we need to go to the decision maker and say, what do you want? Do you really want to have meetings that are effective and optimal, where we get stuff done? Or do you want to have meetings that are unable to actually meet minimum expectations because of all this distraction? That is a decision for whoever's in charge. And it's like we've talked about in many of our other type of programs. If you're an organization and the people who are in charge, the powers that be, don't want it to be the best it could be, or don't have the power to do it, then that's what you have to accept if you're in more of a subordinate role. It's sad, but those are decisions that someone made. Often they're cost impacted. So if it costs more to have a solution where people are not able unilaterally to move their settings initially, then that's the decision that was made. I would argue as an external outside resource that you need to then look and see, hey, do we need these meetings? We have other programs in the series scheduled where we'll talk about that. That sometimes we get into all these meetings, and the truth is we didn't even need a meeting. All I needed was an email or a text message, I guess. Give me the bullet points. You don't need to call a meeting and have 100 people sit here for like 2 things that you could have just told us. You could just send us a note or posted something on our intranet. So that's another issue. But I'm assuming that the virtual meeting in our show today, right, was necessary, right? And the issue that we're dealing with here, isolated, is about this thing with getting off focus in terms of the noise. So the reality is, if it's important and I say it's special, then we do have to have a solution. Now, some people I talk to say, they'll say, Courtney, I disagree with you. These people are all adults. We're not having a meeting with, some third graders that were doing volunteer work. We're having a meeting with all of the adults about the volunteer work for the third graders. So everybody on the call should have enough responsibility for themselves to use their own mute button, right? On their own smartphone or Skype or hardware on their, whatever thing that they're using to call. I'm not disagreeing that in an ideal world, in an ideal fantasy world, everyone would read everything that's important that we send. They would have complete mastery over every type of hardware and software that they have access to. And I mean complete mastery. They would have pre-planned for their attendance at the meeting to ensure that they tested out their own technology, their location, to ensure that they would be heard or not heard. In an ideal world, yes. In an ideal world, we would never eat anything unless we were knowledgeable about the nutritional value and the impact it would have on our physical body and our emotional health. In our ideal world, no one would ever buy anything or spend money without a full analysis and understanding of the caliber and quality of the product or service, and a comparison to determine whether or not there were other better choices in terms of the return on investment. In an ideal world, people would never do any of these things. My experience is this is not an ideal world. This is a good world. I would argue it's the best world I'm familiar with, or that I believe exists as an opportunity for humans to sort of breathe and walk around and exist on, sort of unaided to a large extent in our environment, in our climate. But this is not an ideal world. So the argument, and I've worked with organizations where this has happened. They'll say, well, your suggestions are accurate. We get that, duh. But we told these people that they need to go ahead and make sure that they mute themselves when they call in. And I said, I hear you, but here's the deal. The bigger the meeting invitation pool, the more diversity of experience you're going to have. So there may be people on that call who absolutely completely planned ahead, were in a quiet space, had the ability to do so, and had total control over their technology. So they knew where the mute button was, and that may seem, very simple. But here's the thing. What if you're on a travel assignment related actually, to the meeting? And maybe you're using another terminal to call in on that's not your private opportunity, or maybe you're traveling somewhere else, and because of the travel and the complete hassle it continues to be in many ways when you travel internationally, especially, maybe they're having to use an alternative travel smartphone, right? And for compatibility, so they couldn't be able to use it where they're going. And when they did that, then they don't necessarily have it memorized. Is there a mute function on this? And if so, where is it? Is it hidden in a menu somewhere? Because as we move toward different types of technology, it used to be I talked about when I was, a little bit younger a few weeks ago, a while ago. And I said how when I, graduated from college and first opened businesses in my 20s, that it was a big deal. Like you had to wire your physical office and to get a phone that could handle multiple lines, and conference calls and everything, right? Well, in some of those traditional, what we would now call landline type phone systems, there was a button on there, and it would literally say like mute. It would be a button. As we move toward more aesthetically differentiated types of products, smartphones, for example, part of the beauty of them is that there's not really that many buttons. So if you want to find a function, you have to dig into menus. And if it's not your everyday smartphone that you use in that method, maybe, like I said, you're on travel status or you're using a different type of device because you're in a different type of setting. You're not going to use the device you're using where you live or where you're based isn't going to work where you are. This happens to me all the time. Then I may not have memorized all the submenus to find if there even is a mute function on there. And sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there isn't. Now, sometimes, depending on what type of application you've laid on top of your call, so if you're using a software system that then everyone sort of goes into that software system, and that software system is what's handling all the relay of all the different calls and or video, then some of those will have their own internal system where if you want to go and be muted, you have to push a certain combination, right? So I've been on these where the system will say something like, to mute, please press #60. To unmute your call, please press #61 or whatever. I just made all the details up. The point is, unless that's the same system that you've had mandatory training on for all of your employees and taught them and reminded them of all of this, how do they remember all of this? Because again, there's not a global standard. In many instances, there used to be global standards in some ways, and not even always, but often. If I want 0, press 0 for the operator, right? It's literally the 0 button. Now, many of these systems have their own proprietary codes that you could enter to make it mute. But if I don't know that on top of my head, and I hate the word multitasking because there's data, and I've made the argument in other shows that we don't really multitask. What we do is we switch quickly between I'm focused on this, I'm switching and focusing on that, and that every time we do that, then there's a degradation potentially that we experience. Not that we don't have to do this, right? We have a lot on our plate. I have a lot on my plate. You have a lot on your plate. This is a normal modern experience. One of the reasons why we moved to wearable devices, whether it's in our glasses or our watch or whatever, and we don't know what the future continues to hold, is because we got a lot to do. I can't physically, go find a big, desktop somewhere and log on and all this kind of stuff. I got stuff to do. So we have the ability to get more done, but it also means that we switch quicker between things. And it also means that it's harder for me to retain all of this sometimes minutia of data because I don't use it that much. So if this is like, the first time or one of the few times I've used this call system, I don't remember exactly what buttons I push in what order. Is it mute star 74? Is it mute star 77, unmute 3 times? Like, I don't know. I can't remember. So when we look at this, we go back to the basics of our business practice. You got to give people the tools to be able to do their work. People want to be at the important meetings. Remember, there's knowledge that's being shared that very often is incredibly important to people. You have to give them the tools. The assumption, and I have experienced this, where people just think, well, we're using whatever, we're using this software or that software, or we're using this, this vendor. And like just automatically, globally, everybody knows what that means in terms of what button combination you have to push to make sure that software mutes you is not realistic or fair. Now, if you want to add extra cost in terms of time and money and doing mandatory training for everybody, hey, you guys, we're going to be doing the real estate, data meeting. But before that, we're going to have another mandatory meeting where we're going to teach everybody how to use the mute system. You can. Most people will find that to be frustrating and ridiculous. But my argument is if you don't do that, right? Like if you didn't give me the tool to be able to do this quickly, like up front, then to argue that I messed up, it was my fault that you heard the background noise from my, crying niece or, the traffic while I'm waiting at the metro stop for my business trip or whatever. If you're mad at me, I'm arguing that you need to have given me the tools. And the expectation that I am in total control of my environment and whatever I'm using to access this meeting is, I think, unrealistic. I haven't memorized every single menu system on every single portal that I might use. Maybe it's a smartphone. Maybe it's my tablet. Maybe it was somebody else's. Maybe I'm at a hotel and I've not used it. I don't know. So what I'm saying is, it seems simple. Push either the button or the combination of the button to turn on a mute function. Many systems have this. I have actually, though, used, especially when you're somewhere and you're picking up, maybe I'm using what we'll call a landline phone. I'm in a hotel. There's not even a mute button on this. I don't even know where it is. Uh-oh. Right? And what I'm saying is this. Something so simple, so seemingly simple, right? Turn on the button that turns off your noise so that you can listen and hear what everybody else is doing, but nobody has to hear what you're doing. Maybe you're typing. Again, maybe you're walking around outside and it's windy and the wind is, hitting the microphone. You're not speaking. You're not part of the agenda. And what I'm referring to is mostly people who are attending the meeting that aren't speaking. I have rarely, very rarely, personally experienced where somebody who's on the agenda doesn't have a professional and clear quality of their presentation. I mean, I've just never, I'm not saying never, but very rarely. Most people know I'm on the agenda, I'm going to be speaking. Then even if I am on travel status, I'm going to have gone ahead and made sure that I had a prearranged quiet area for my meeting. Or even if I am working from home with a sick, grandma who calls out for me every few minutes, I need you. Okay, fine. But I've got this call coming up. So grandma, I'm going to, step out and go to the library, or I'm going to have my, sister come over and take care of grandma for that little bit. So I make sure I have quiet. Like I said, it's very rare. Most of us know, like I'm on the agenda, let's prepare. And it may be simple stuff, right? I just need to be somewhere quiet. It could be a closet. It could be a restroom. It may be that if I'm somewhere around family and friends, I just need to let them know, hey, I'm going to be on that call. Can you keep it quiet? If it's something that I know that people may not be able to control themselves, and or there may be other species, right? My pet parrot, right? Well, then I'm going to remove myself to a place, or put the parrot in a quiet area and close the door. I mean, it's not that hard. And like I said, I rarely hear the mute issue from the speakers who are slated to speak and provide knowledge. It's from people who are attending or background noise, and that's where it becomes really frustrating. And what I'm saying is the argument, well, the responsibility is on them, right? They're attending, they should be the one. Yeah, ideally, yes, but like I can sit here and give you tons of examples where even though I'm not the smartest person ever in a group, I'm also usually not the stupidest person on in the history of the universe, and I may not know what thing to push on that tablet or whatever to mute, or whatever special code that this one system used. And if you didn't take the time to tell me, then I'm arguing that it's your responsibility, because you are the one that called the meeting. That means you got to control the entire environment. Now, the extra step of the mandatory meeting ahead of time, I think, is a bit much, although in some instances it may be required. What would be bright is when you send out that final meeting information. Hey, here's the number that you're going to call in or the website you're going to log into, and here's if there's a passcode or whatever. When you send that out, go ahead and resend people what the mute is, whether they have to push a certain number of buttons, where that mute process will work. Sometimes when you're using certain types of software, if you're using a landline, you need to do one option. If you're logging in online and hearing audio through the internet, that's a different option. Like, you got to tell people. And if you don't want to go through the hassle of that, because realizing, oh my goodness, there's one protocol if they've pushed a button and logged in through, Wi-Fi, through internet access, there's a different button if they've actually made a phone call through this number. Then what I strongly suggest is that you need to go ahead then, as I said a while ago, and make the decision to, again, take this off of people's plate. People have a lot, again, to do just in life, which is awesome and good, right? Because then I feel engaged and active, and I'm using my mind, and I'm, have all this kind of good stuff happening. But why am I having to make 8 different things to try to investigate? And I've actually been in situations where I've done this, where I'm thinking, where I'm actually trying to, hey, how do you mute this? And I still couldn't even find it. Right, where I went to an organization and they said, well, you have to ask IT. And I ask IT, and IT says, hey, we just IT. You have to ask the vendor. So I go to the website for the vendor whose infrastructure we're using. And the vendor's website is, I'm on there, for 20 minutes. I still don't see it. So what I'm saying is, when you're looking at making the decision, and I know the decision was made somewhere, because this wasn't just sort of magic. Somewhere somebody decided this is how we're going to make these calls happen. Whether it's a video call, whether it's an audio call only, whatever that is, somebody made the decision. Just like a long time ago, I gave my story early on in the show that I made a decision. I'm going to hire somebody. They're going to wire this a certain way, put this certain, multi-line phone system in here. I made the decision. So somebody made the decision. One of the most important things in making this decision is, I would argue that you want to take the onus off of the attendees or anybody else and find a universal system where whoever's in charge of the meeting, in terms of speaking or whatever, can themselves set a universal mute. Problem solved. I've been the person when I'm fumbling around, I'm at the airport, I'm trying to find the mute on this thing and I can't figure it out, and I'm the one that's embarrassed because I'm realizing, the background noise is coming from me. Right? Because here I am trying to listen to important information, but overhead, especially in airports, there's just tons of noise. And you're constantly getting the really loud noise because they're making announcements for people to get on their correct plane. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now boarding flight 743, nonstop to Pensacola. I need you please to enter the boarding gate. Boarding area, we are at gate B74. They need to make those announcements. Does everybody need to hear that on the call? No. I'm embarrassed when I can't figure out where the mute button is. But how did this happen? I shouldn't have been in this situation, I'm arguing. I want to be at the meeting, that's why I'm there. Make it easy for me to be able to attend and get the knowledge I need without either being embarrassed because I'm the one the noise is coming from. Oops. Or I'm frustrated because somebody else can't figure it out. And we're not, again, stupid idiots. It's just that life comes quickly. And maybe I'm in a vehicle, or maybe I'm in a rental car, maybe, who knows? So I'm at the meeting, which is good. That's the whole purpose. I'm ready to learn and get the information. So what am I arguing? I'm arguing that a lot of thought needs to go into this. Part of it is that the selection phase, and that you need to select software that's going to be able to meet these needs. And do not fall back on this argument, well, they need to figure it out. No, they don't. Because the truth is that maybe they're trying, maybe they're in a really tough situation trying to, be there for the call, and you're making it difficult. Why? Don't do that. It's disrespectful. You're hosting the meeting, right? So then take responsibility for that. And pick solutions from the beginning that will give you an opportunity where you can just mute everybody who's not on the agenda. Now, some of the pushback I get in this discussion is people say, well, what about people asking questions? Well, that's why you need to have made sure ahead of time that there was an alternative. In many of these options, what they'll do is they'll have an opportunity for you, if you're logged into the software, online, to be able to type a question or raise your hand, push a button and show that you have a question. The challenge, though, is someone's on the phone often, a traditional phone line, they're not logged into the website, then there's not a way for them to do that. Well, my point is you should have planned ahead for that. So part of that may be saying to people at the outset, hey, everyone, we're going to get started now for the meeting. We're talking about the data and from the the last quarter, one of the things I want you to know is that when we get to 20 minutes after the hour, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. At that point, any questions that you have, make sure you save them, and I will release and unmute the call so that people who need to speak will be heard. There's a solution. Now, I am confident, just as a layperson, the technology enhancements are continue to be made, so that we'll be better and better and more fine-tuned, easier to use technology will allow us to simultaneously make the environment quiet and conducive for the meeting, and then allow people, when they do have a question, to put that question in queue and in line, which is ideally the best way. And that I'm certain. So maybe that someone has a question and they could, go ahead and record their, if they're not in a situation where they can type it, right? Maybe they could record a voice question and then submit that. I'm certain that new solutions are continuing to be implemented and come and be rolled out to the public at large at price points that are reasonable. In the interim, you need to take control of the agenda and take control of preparing this. The easiest way to do this and the most hospitable way is to go ahead and have an opportunity for whoever's the host. So whoever's talking, you've pre-planned when questions will be addressed, right? And you've set up an opportunity for people to either be universally unmuted. Now the problem, of course, with you when it's question time and I've seen this done, and then it's like, okay, we universally muted everybody. Now I'm going to universally unmute everybody. Well, did you need to do that? Because not everybody had a question. And then you may catch someone who was in the middle of a very important discussion, with trying to make sure they were boarding the right plane or something. And now you've embarrassed them because you unmuted them. Don't do that. You need to be really clear up front with people what the plan is, which needs to be fully thought out in terms of contingencies before the meeting date even is near. The beauty of being able to attend the virtual meetings and obtain knowledge with mute means I'm able then to multitask or switch between a couple other things, or be in an environment where I am on a travel status or whatever. Maybe I'm sick. Maybe I was not able physically to even come to my office that day for the meeting because I'm so ill with the flu, but I was able to roll over while I'm, on medication and not feeling well, but roll over and access on my tablet the meeting. That's a good thing. But it's not a good thing if now I'm embarrassed because you unmuted me. I didn't know you were unmuting me. Think about these things. So I'm making the argument that in the interim, you need to have thought about the questions. If you don't have a protocol that you're comfortable for questions, you need to say to people, hey, this was the meeting. If you have a question or a concern, jot it down, and here's my email, or here's how my number, and here's how you'll contact me and follow up with me. It's a whole nother show about what happens when we get off track and off target with question sessions. Questions are awesome and great. We want questions. It may not always be an opportunity for the question to occur simultaneously with the meeting where we're disseminating the information. That may need to be a different session. And you need to prepare people at all times. The fact that somebody's called in or logged on is a good thing. They want to be there. That's the most important part. And there should never be frustration or on the part of the host saying, oh, I can't believe they logged in. There's all that noise. Look, they logged in. That's the important part. They care. So let's make it easy for them to succeed. And again, this was not focused on the person who's speaking. That's a different show. But this was about just general background noise, virtual meetings in mute. And my argument is you need to have some sort of power over muting everyone, so that we're not waiting and getting frustrated. And who knows what that person's dealing with. Maybe they're trying to get to the mute button. Maybe they've fallen down. Now they're not even next to their device. And that's why there's so much noise and rustling, because they fell and maybe they're injured. Who knows? So go ahead and have a way, unless you want to have one of these alternatives where you confirm that you've disseminated effectively and appropriately a universally easy way for everyone to mute themselves. If you haven't done that, then you need to go ahead and do it yourself. You're the host. And that way it's quiet. Everyone's going to listen to people who are sharing knowledge. That's great. It's wonderful. I have a question. And maybe you don't yet have a way to take questions for people who aren't logged in, where they could type a question, because that's a great alternative, right? And then when it gets to the question section, you can just start reading through the line of questions. That's a great way to do it. But if you don't have that, then we need to come up with a different way. Maybe there'll be a different follow-up session, right? Or maybe you'll reach out to people, send a mass email to each individual attendee. Hi, Rebecca, you attended the meeting. I'm just doing a follow-up. Were there any questions or concerns you had? Okay, there you go. I can think of lots of different alternatives, but the key is you must, again, remember, meetings are special and marvelous. It's because it is special and there is information people need. You need to make it as easy for them to access the data. If somebody has background noise, that's not their fault necessarily. I'm arguing it's whoever hosted and is in charge of the meeting. From the very beginning, we need to have a solution that we deploy for the meeting that allows us to mute other people. And we need to go ahead then and be very consistent with that practice. I've been on, like I said, all sides of this. I certainly lead a lot of meetings, but I've definitely been someone who's attending a meeting. And like I said, I've been the one that the noise is coming from me, and I'm embarrassed. I don't want that to happen. I just couldn't figure out how to turn the mute. I didn't know what code or what button or wherever. Right? That's embarrassing. I've also been the one on the other side listening and thinking, well, who's the goof on his calls? Got that background noise. None of this is good. It's all preventable. You need to have a solution that allows you then for people to enter that room and know it's the space where we're going to have the maximum sharing of knowledge. And we're not going to be distracted by any kind of background noise. And if we then need to rethink how we're comfortable then with presentation, some people get really, these are all totally different topics. But one of the things I think that also leads to the mute problem is somebody doesn't really have a firm agenda. And so they want to do things like, hey, everybody, I'm just going to toss it out. Don't really have a set agenda today. What's on people's minds? Okay, well, when you do that, then you're begging for unmute issues. But those are other things we're discussing in other shows in this series, in the Meeting Mayhem series. Things like agenda, things like how much do we need to do in terms of unstructured, handling questions more specifically, doing things with introductions, having meetings to quote check in. There's a lot of things that we've got set up and scheduled for this series that I hope will over time create a library of resources for you to think through and strategize and plan ahead so that we do get the meeting back to being, again, that really special, great thing where we're sharing knowledge. A meeting is awesome. Knowledge is great. We just have to structure it. And it's tough because we're constantly facing new technology and changes and everything. And we're trying to do the content while thinking about the infrastructure issues. And it's a lot to do. But let's be very focused on making it as simple for everybody. Right? And again, selection of the software or hardware or so that we have the ability to mute entrance, and then rethinking this entire situation. So it's on us. We're the host. So that means we're going to, like any host, right? We planned ahead, and our goal is to make it the best experience for our attendees. And so when we can take away that background noise without, embarrassing people or wasting time, then let's do it. And that's a great meeting. So I thank you so much for joining us for this debut of the Meeting Mayhem series, virtual meetings and mute. This should be hopefully something to get you thinking. I'd love to, as always, hear your feedback. Please, when you drop by CourtneyAnderson.com, or I'm on Twitter at ZealousBusiness, let me know what's on your mind, show suggestions, feedback. And again, thank you so much for being part of the program today.